All right. Well, I'm here with Burke Peters, who was recommended to me by Q, who is a recent guest. You may have seen him on Things Hidden, where we explored some ideas that Q, who is on Twitter, and he has his blog, when he talks about how to apply the insights of Rene Girard's mimetic theory to the field of economics. This is something that I've been interested in for some time. I it's one of those things that's a to-do list on my to-do list that I want to, having read a little bit of the Austrian school and some other stuff, and then a little bit of some of the folks who are in the field of mimetic theory who are trying to explain insights about economics uh, using mimetic theory. I thought, there needs to be more done here. I see some real nice synergy um, that can map Austrian school ideas with mimetic theory anthropology and give us a better, more robust discipline in the school of understanding economics. So it is a great privilege to have someone who's been devoting a lot of time to this subject as a student of economic theory and as someone who's an accountant and a person interested in investments and how to do these things in a smart, practical way. Welcome to the program, Burke.
Thanks, David. It's good to be on here. I excited to talk to you about some mimetic theory and Mises and Austrian economics and all that fun stuff.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. So I usually get into the fun, exciting stuff about mimetic theory when it comes to applying it to politics and current events. And that typically gets into how politicians are mimetic doubles. The more the left and right fight over the same object of desire, which is power and violence and coercion, the more they become undifferentiated. These are principles we learn from Rene Girard. I talk about scapegoat mechanism and how of course, the aspects of the scapegoating mechanism still persist in our politics today, and in the need to have a big other that's a transcendent that binds communities together. I believe one of those big others is the science, which is totally different from science as a discipline, but the science has now become a kind of big other for some time that binds people together and needs to exclude people socially as a scapegoat mechanism to kind of keep that unification of the in group together. So those are things that I do. I apply it typically in the current event setting to politics. But having said that, I think you've done some good work. You've sent me some notes that I was looking at right before, and we won't be able to cover it all today, but about how to look at the more deeper mechanisms of mimetic desire and how it applies to the field of economics. So you kind of help me. Where should we start here? How should we think about this? Give me some kickoff
So
thoughts.
I'll try to start as best I can. Again, this is something that is really new in my head. It's something I've been researching for probably the past 5 to 6 years, and so there's still a lot of ongoing work. I have a lot of old notes that I would have liked to had reviewed before I came on here. But I'd say that my biggest starting point, having started reading Girard and Mises around the same time, was the first 200 pages of Mises, where he really talks about praxeology and action and why we do things. And at the same time, I was reading Girard and Uriarlian, excuse me if I say his name wrong, and he talked about the three brains, the mimetic brain, and then the sort of rational brain and the emotional brain, and how these things kind of interplayed through people's lives. And I felt like that was a good starting place that led into praxeology, where in Mises and Austrian economics, often the way they describe it is that action takes place when someone is sort of uncomfortable and desires a more comfortable or more satisfying state, and that the psychological motivation or fuel or energy behind that decision was the domain of psychology, not the domain of economics. And that once we had sort of decided to undertake these actions, and then we would be subject to these various forces, scarcity and things like that. So that's really where I started to look, and it's been here, there, everywhere. I got interested in efficient markets, and because I felt like they were just sort of something was wrong there. The efficient market hypothesis I was taught in school was
what does that mean?
Well, it's a hard, I'm sure somebody can give you a brilliant answer, but something like you can't really make money in the markets and investing, and things are either random or there's also, that's the random walk hypothesis is a component that I would critique as well. But the efficient markets is sort of the prices are going to converge where supply and demand meet. And generally that's true. Our preferences are sort of fixed and convex is the neoclassical view, where I think that based on some of the works of Andrea Orlean, another mimetic theory author, wrote a book called The Empire of Value. It's a great book. I love it. There's parts of it that I would disagree with. There's parts of it that I think are right on point. And he talks about how our preferences can vary with the degree of other people who own the same object. So something like Michael Jordan, like Jordan shoes, that the utility of that isn't just fixed and convex, like for us, that it can vary with the number of other people who are attracted to that object as well.
Right. Interesting. So Michael Jordan, owning Michael Jordan shoes is going to be mediated by how many people desire Michael Jordan shoes. Is that what you were saying?
Something like the price people are willing to pay varies. People are willing to pay insane amounts for shoes that are basically commodities, and something about the number of people. There is a level of scarcity because they do limit the number of shoes, Michael Jordan shoes, that they could create. But that creates a larger effect than what you might think because of basically the mimetic effects of, they want to be like Michael Jordan. They want to be like people who have Jordan shoes, maybe more than they want to be like Jordan. Things like that.
Just like water is abundant in some cases.
But Voss water is $9 a bottle.
Or holy water is highly valued for some people more than, other water, right?
Right.
So that leads us to the conclusion that value is subjective, right?
Yeah. Value is subjective, but there's an element of it that's influenced by other people.
So value is individually subjective.
Yeah.
Is that a way to put it mimetically?
Yeah, I would say that. So there's a couple examples from finance that I feel like aren't talked about enough that I really like, that are, to me, sort of mimetic economic examples. So one of them is, despite what anyone might think about Bitcoin, back in like 2017, I remember distinctly this interview that Warren Buffett gave, where he came out and he called Bitcoin rat poison. That's not an economic argument. It's not a financial argument. So it's not using the rational brain. So he is obviously tapping into the emotional brain, but there's another part of it that people look at Warren Buffett and they want to be like Warren Buffett because Warren Buffett has all these symbols of success. So they're always looking at Warren Buffett. So the mimetic brain tells them that he is who they need to listen to. And that allows him to just say something totally emotional, like Bitcoin is rat poison. And despite any sort of rational thought about Bitcoin itself, you can make easily a large crowd of people are going to basically just choose against Bitcoin without knowing anything about Bitcoin at all.
Because he represents a generational, aspirational status that
sort of
people
an
have from a certain generational
mediator.
Like Gen Z kids are not looking at Warren Buffett, but a certain generational set range
views him as an external, almost transcendental mediator of financial success. So
in the biblical term, he would be a principality in some sense. I don't mean that in a mean way. I mean that in a nation. He represents a nation.
Yeah.
Jesus talks about being his body on earth, and I think that is not something esoteric. It's something about human nature, that there are bodies of people that congregate around models of desire that we are influenced by, right?
Yeah. And this kind of leads into more of an alternative to the efficient market hypothesis. There's an economist, Andrew Lowe, who wrote a book, The Adaptive Markets Hypothesis, which I found very interesting. I'm not a huge I don't necessarily want to get into a discussion of evolutionary theories too deeply. It can kind of derail things, but he has a model of economics that's sort of merged with evolutionary theory, which I also think can sort of be merged with sort of a mimetic markets hypothesis, that he describes them as species, and that there's almost like hedge fund species, and that there's these different groups of hedge fund species who are attempting different strategies in order to achieve the same goal of superior risk-adjusted returns. And that is sort of the same language. Like I actually think they're just models. They're not so much species that are just like all following the same protocol, but they all have the same model, and that defines what that species sort of means.
Who's the model there?
I mean, a lot of different people, but they're, for fundamental
the collective investors, of the people running the principles of the hedge fund are the models.
Well, those people themselves often have models. Warren Buffett is a big follower of Benjamin Graham. Well, Benjamin Graham's dead and gone, so he's an external model par excellence. You can't get to him. He is the guy who made all that money and who had this highly successful career. And Warren Buffett is probably attempting the same thing. And then so it's basically, as long as Warren Buffett doesn't lose a massive amount of money, he's going to die with this record of just being this untouchable investor. And for hundreds of years, as long as we have capitalism, people are going to be following Warren Buffett's method of investments. They've become abstracted, and obviously he he was highly influenced by a great deal of people. But that's kind of how I see it. At some point, these people come in and out of fashion. As Peter Lynch was very famous in the 90s. There's a lot of these, I think, basically these species of investors that are following after these certain models like Warren Buffett.
And then there's these alternative role models. We have on the show a lot, James Dale Davidson, who wrote The Sovereign Individual. He's a financial forecaster, predicted the rise of crypto in the 90s. And every time I have him on, people email me, oh my goodness. Oh, wow. He's got this hardcore following. A lot of people in the, the crypto world love him,
Yeah, for sure.
Like a Yoda of that world,
Yeah, an influence on me as well. I read that a while back, and I really like, obviously the crypto prediction, but the decentralization of sort of societies. I've been sort of watching that thesis play out, I feel like, a little bit over the last 10 years or so, and just seeing how basically it seems to be from the internet and just allowing everyone to group together in this global village, which didn't really turn out. It turned out to be a bunch of cliques going off into their own little parties, is what it seems like. And that's sort of, to me, an indicator of that decentralization thesis they laid out in that book.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that as globalized as we've become more tribal than ever, haven't we? Yeah,
you got your little segments of Twitter, and they all kind of tweet back and forth at each other, and that's reality for them.
And then when you go outside, it's not quite as, there's a latency there, Tribalism is still there, but it doesn't seem as vicious and nasty. Maybe because there's not as much skin in the game when you're online,
Yeah. You mean just like you can go into a Walmart and there's like, you're not going to see as much.
People getting canceled,
Right. Yeah. We're sort of channeling it.
Yeah, it's so interesting. So what about like the Austrian business cycle? Does the mimetic theory have something to add to that?
I think there is something there. There's I think his name is Didier Sornet, wrote a book on why stock markets crash, where he has a whole chapter referencing Andre Orlean and mimetic theory. And he's a very technical guy, and he talks about this earn problem. I think it has a lot to say about just hitting at an inflection point where suddenly we go the other direction. I guess in my mind, most of the positive feedbacks in markets are related to mimetic. If they have mimetic causes, I guess. But the more the negative feedbacks in the market are more of a response to what I guess you could call a fundamental event in the real economy. So I do think
what causes the bubbles to form is more of a mimetic desire issue, but what causes the bubbles to pop is not as affected by mimetic desire.
Yeah, sort of a series of anomalies. We construct this narrative over time, and then a sort of a series of anomalies starts to poke holes in that, which creates basically an inflection point, or a Schwerpunkt, the center of gravity, a point where like the ball starts to flip to the other side, I guess. Whatever that crisis point is, probably more related to real economy, things poking their heads out, like coronavirus, things like that then cause this whole other mimetic contagion of panic.
So does mimetic theory provide some insights into how the housing market bubble happened in the crash? That maybe Austrian school obviously was predicting this was going to happen, but then they get criticized for not having any time commitment to their predictions, because they don't like making time-based predictions.
Yeah, I wouldn't really like making time-based predictions either. There's probably a whole angle we could approach on that. I think Jean-Pierre Dupuy has some interesting comments. He wrote a book that I really was influenced by, Metaphysics on the Tsunamis, on the Metaphysics of Tsunami, which I think sort of relates. Where we kind of construct this narrative. He gives the example of, he got, I think, somewhat criticized for this, but he gave this example of the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. They sort of created this narrative around the power plant and around the location that basically allowed them to go forward with the construction, when just based on certain likelihoods of tsunami, things could happen. That I'd have to go. That's a deep topic, I think, but the event itself maybe isn't. It's sort of like a black swan. I don't know what we can really do besides maybe just try to understand the narrative itself and the flaws, I guess, in their own narratives that we have, and try to look at more like the subversive elements, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Do you think that mimetic theory has some lessons that we can learn from general central economic planning? Top-down macroeconomic micromanaging of the economy, that mimetic theory adds to the conversation as to why that causes malinvestment and why that causes, the deformations and economic prosperity that people are experiencing. The retardation of wages and savings and capital formation.
Well, I mean, I'm certainly familiar with the Austrian argument, to try to put it to try to look at it from a mimetic angle. I mean, I just think it's the calculation problem, but I don't. I have a friend on Twitter, and I don't want to butcher his name or what he said, so I'll just kind of paraphrase him anonymously. But he was likening Israel and the 12 tribes as maybe a better model for actual human relations than a model with a king, and that when in Samuel, when God allows the children of Israel to have a king, he sort of says, he's going to be hard on you. He's going to be a harsh ruler. I think there's something about kingship as a human that's just fundamentally flawed, that we're not able to provide what God can provide, essentially. And God sort of in the Samuel, sort of references like, you didn't accept me as your king, so you need a human king. And so I would sort of view it similarly. And, from the mimetic perspective, I just, it's like, we need to have wise leaders, but I think there's something about humans that probably we need 12 tribes.
Interesting.
If that's an answer.
You don't mean specifically 12 tribes, but you mean
no. I just mean that sort of an
example. So when you
I'm not sure.
What's that?
The guy I was referencing is actually a rabbi, so I'm not sure if he meant that or not. I don't think so, but
so when you're when you're looking at this from, see, I tend to slip into political, descriptions to talk about how mimetic theory helps us understand how central planning distorts markets. So I don't know if there's a way to explain what I say politically into economic terms, but I talk about the idea of, violence retards society, right? So whenever you're introducing sacrificial violence for a solution, you're going to retard the ability for societies to look outside for creative, nonviolent, um, constructive solutions to a problem, whether it's pollution, whether it's a lack of energy, whether it's a health crisis, skyrocketing chronic illnesses. When we're always looking to a monopoly of the use of violence to sacrificially mediate what those solutions will be, that violence will retard the ability for society to progress and to move beyond and to come out with, Galileos and so forth, who are minority opinions who end up creating, paradigm shifts.
Yeah, I mean, I would certainly agree with that. I think that there's something about needing to allow people to at least live. They might be wrong. Our narrative might say they're wrong, and like Galileo, they might not be wrong, but they might just be wrong. And I think it's worth that risk a lot of times. Certainly, I just wouldn't be willing to take the risk in the other direction. But I understand that it leads to a lot of difficult questions.
Do you think that Adam Smith, when he said, they used to say that economics was a moral science. Do you believe that it's a moral science? Economics should be considered a moral science?
Yeah.
Ethics?
And I'm sure there's a really great answer to why, but yeah, just because I think I associate moral with sort of choices and action on Earth, and what should I do, and what should people do, more than, I guess, a scientific question. If that's the dichotomy, the scientific question, I think there are scientific questions of economics that can be answered with hypotheses. There's unstable relations and parameters in economic variables, as Mises says, and it's obvious from actual data. So I'm not like totally against data or calculation, obviously, but I do think that the Austrian approach of basically deduction and not necessarily giving time date based estimates and things like that are correct. I would, just, I guess, say I'm more of a microeconomist than I am a big picture political guy. And I think that does have to do with me being sort of non-violent, non-political, maybe more of a civil disobedience type of guy than I am trying to get people riled up to solve some gigantic problem through the state. If we want to solve some of those problems, I think we can build businesses to do those.
I agree.
And I think company is the most effective form of organization in the modern world. You get 5 people together, you can get some money, you can perform some services, and you can build a good or a product that can help solve real problems in the world.
So let's do that. So how can we use mimetic theory? How can we study Rene Girard and, say, Austrian school, and from those disciplines, work on micro scale economic practical advancement and understanding of markets and so forth? Let's get into the pragmatic micro scale things.
Yeah, I guess the easiest thing for me to spot is that like mimetic theory itself kind of gets a bad rap for being able to spot the bad stuff really easily. And that's what I mean. It's the same here. I feel like, it's like you look at every scammer and Ponzi scheme guy, and they're all using basically mimetic theory's advertisement, all these like different angles of trying to get people to buy into their fund, Bernie Madoff, all these things, that it's just so easy to spot out the bad. And I think there's a really great example of rivalry in the markets. So I'm trying to remember his name here. Bill Ackman, a big hedge fund manager, took a large position or short position on Herbalife, which he believes is a Ponzi scheme or pyramid scheme. Not Ponzi, he believed it was a pyramid, multi-level marketing scheme that it just wasn't any good. So he shorted it like $1 billion or more. Well, Carl Icahn, who's sort of a rival to Bill Ackman, hedge fund manager, saw that move, and he knew that sort of this multi-level marketing pyramid company is in a position where all that really matters is authority. If a bigger authority than Bill Ackman comes in and says, no, it's not a pyramid scheme, it's not a pyramid scheme. So that's what Carl Icahn does. He comes in, crushes Bill Ackman short, forces Bill Ackman to sell. So at a tactical level for like an investment manager, that is a lesson in mimetic theory that Carl Icahn knew, that just based off of like sort of the climate around the business and the media, as well as Bill Ackman's sort of personality as an activist investor, and then the anti-American sentiment of shorting a stock on the stock market, that all he would need to do is come in and buy a large position that would totally blow Ackman out. And then he could just turn around and sell again. Who cares about the long-term effects of Herbalife? Carl Icahn just walks out with a nice profit. So there's examples like that I can point out everywhere, I think, and they're more negative examples. And then there's just this entire effect of like, if you read Robert Cialdini's Persuasion, he gives this really great example of this lady who is selling jade jewelry for $5, and all she does is just marks it up to $20, and she sells more because it's more prestigious. So that, I guess, if you want a way to like look at how to build a business and do these things, I guess if you see climate change as a large problem, you can look at Elon Musk as someone who is very successful at creating a mimetic effect around a vehicle that supposedly helps with the climate change problem, and then has been able to really just hype that up beyond belief for a vehicle.
So can we do that ethically and in good taste?
I mean,
that's the catch-22, isn't it?
Right. Yeah.
Now, once you understand the mechanism of desire,
most likely it's not necessarily going to help you. I guess it just can help you as an investor identify businesses that have gone beyond the pale and then they're nearing an inflection point or something like this. You can possibly help markets become a little bit more efficient as an investor. I think that an investor is something where you really have to have a long conversation to decide if that's an ethical thing to do. Doesn't seem like you're doing much, but
in terms of like money right now is a big question, right? Elon Musk is a big mimetic role model for people who, younger people who, don't want to have anything to do with the stock market and the dollar and everything like that. So they don't want to get into gold. They can't afford gold.
Right.
And then Elon's come out against Bitcoin or whatever, or whatever he said. I don't know the particulars of the thing, but how does that play out? Like, what's the mimetic insight for money? Gold and silver.
Yeah, I mean,
crypto, fiat.
I just think it's a feedback. It's sort of like the use of the QWERTY keyboard. There are better keyboards, more efficient keyboards to use. QWERTY keyboard isn't necessarily the most efficient, but it's what caught on. It's what everybody else uses. Similar to language, there are more efficient languages probably than the English language, but we all use it because it's the most helpful for communicating. So money is sort of a medium for communication. And then there's obviously like these effects that happen to that when you print more of it. And when you have cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, shouldn't be able to print any more of it. So it should have a fixed amount. So we should solve that problem along with various other problems related to electronic currencies. I guess I don't know what I think of Elon's reasoning. I don't know if he actually believes that using Bitcoin will heat up use up all the world's coal or something like this. I don't know if that's true or not. I don't really know if he believes that either. I'm not sure why, I guess, but he certainly did have a massive impact, partially because he had hyped Bitcoin up so much that a lot of people have been listening to him purely for that reason. People designed trading algorithms to watch his Twitter feed to see if he'd mentioned Bitcoin, and try to determine the sentiment on that tweet. So there's a direct basic connection between the stock market and Elon Musk's Twitter account.
Yeah.
That's unmediated by humans at this point.
Right.
So there's a lot that went on there when he sort of built up this massive hype and then turned on it at the last instant. Pretty much anyone who had bought because they listened to Elon will sell because for the same reasons.
Now, how does something like the U.S. military play a role as a mimetic model for what you should invest in, like keeping a hold of dollars because they run, military situations around the world until these unidentified aerial phenomenons show up?
I'm not sure who they are.
Yeah, that's the new topic in the news. We're going to be interviewing Lou Elizondo, the guy who ran that program for the Pentagon, the UFO investigation program. And I was just throwing that out there that as of now, America is the military, as far as we understand, the military dominant monopoly in the world. And that's what allows the dollar to be such a hot ticket, you know what I mean, for the world economy.
Yeah.
Is that a mimetic model?
full faith and force of the United States government certainly means something.
Or is that sacrifice? Is that more of a sacrificial mimetic lesson we can learn of like the power of whoever holds the sacred, which is the ability to, sacrifice.
Yeah.
Is the one who holds the object of desire. Everything's, like if.
Yeah. Military is a hard one. I would see it that way.
We have a military-backed currency, in other words, is what I'm saying, right?
Yeah. So it's the reserve currency, but it's backed by the full faith and force governments for legal tender for tax purposes. But sort of, if you don't want to use the U.S. dollars, you can't pay taxes, and that's against the law. So they'll come for you with guns if they have to, and put you in jail. So yeah, that's how it works. Overseas, that's an element. The central bank does have some effect on the strength of the U.S. dollar, and they do intervene often. So it's also a sort of a stalemate, like a Mexican standoff with other central banks in the world. So if they're all reducing their rates, then if you can reduce your rate too, or something like that, or if you keep yours the same, that has a certain effect. So it is sort of a game for them. And I don't really think you can fight that as a business person. You're just not strong enough to fight the United States Federal Reserve. So that's a huge element of control too.
So knowing that you have these powers and principalities that are playing a game that's beyond your control, how should one, from a pragmatic standpoint, act economically in a way that can be sustainable? You have the traditional.
Yeah, I'd hedge my risks.
What's that?
I said I'd hedge my tail risks. So yes, I don't know when they're going to make their moves. I can estimate based on certain conditions that I know they use to estimate conditions. So I can kind of try and think about how they think about things. But that's really the best bet you're going to get. There's people who are watching every tremble in the Fed chair's voice for some sign that maybe interest rates will rise.
Sounds like poker. Yeah.
So yeah, that's pretty much what it is. And you're not really trying to fight them. I guess, Mark Spitznagel is a great Austrian investor, says you should try and jujitsu the Fed rather than fight them. Yeah. Try to use their weight.
That's what you call the Tao of Capital, right?
Yeah. Excellent book.
Man.
And there's a lot in there that I think,
see, in my mind, I automatically go to that book I just got a hold of called Christ, the Eternal Tao.
Yeah, I've heard a lot about it from Q.
And then I think about mimetic theory and the insights that Girard gets from the Gospels and then the Tao of Capital. And I'm like, man, how does this all fit together? I think there's something very interesting here. Like it's like touching an elephant in the dark, the whole saying. You're like, there's something here, and I don't know how to put it all together yet,
Certainly. I definitely, yeah. There's a lot there, and there's a bunch of different angles. And for now, for the most part, it's just for me working at them all seeing where it takes me.
So what would
I
you
think
say to what would you say to someone who, going back to the economic theory and praxeology and Austrian school economics, liberty, what would you say to the person who's a casual fan of this world? They're a conservative or libertarian or whatever, and they like Austrian school. They've read a little bit about it, not
you cut
super
out there.
well versed in it, but they, they have an interest in this field. What would you say? What are some things that they can learn and add to their toolkit of knowledge with mimetic theory, going back to that starting point where we started?
Sorry, you cut out there for a little bit, but it just real quick sped me up on it on the audio. So if I heard you right, if I was to introduce or give some people some recommendations that were just getting introduced to mimetic theory and
just like for folks who are, because see, some of my audience are fans of mimetic theory, and some of my audience is more like a libertarian who doesn't really know as much about mimetic theory. And I'm saying, what are some really key insights that you can tease out for people briefly here as to why mimetic theory needs to be part of their study and integration into their understanding of economics?
Yeah. So Austrian economics is great. It's going to give you a lot. And I think that if anybody who's read Human Action, the first 200 pages where he talks about epistemology and how we come to make these decisions, there's a lot that can be learned from understanding how we are affected by other people in our decision making. And you'll be able to, in my mind, make sense of a lot of economic phenomena that happen that seem like just sort of crazy, like irrational, can be made rational and can be understood. Things like the tulip mania, we call it a mania, and it seems irrational. And to an extent, looking back, it is. But at the time, if you know that if I buy this, and that means 10 of my friends will buy it because they saw that I bought it, and there's this network effect, things like that. It can start to make a lot more sense in these cascades and these large and fast movements in the markets that I often see fundamental analysts and more classical approaching Austrian views sort of tend to be at a loss for words as to why these things are happening. Taleb is an excellent read, and I think that Taleb has read Girard. I don't think he talks about it, but I think he has. I think that does have an influence on some of his views, and I consider him to be somewhat of an Austrian as well. So there's a whole lot there. I think there's a lot that can be said just about, I would also want to mention external versus internal mediation, if you can get familiar with what that means, and understanding how some role models or some strategies or conventional ways of approaching investing or economics are really there because there's some external model that gives you a lot more of an objective insight. You're not in direct competition or rivalry with this person. You don't have any reason to just be like, this person's wrong or this person's right. That comes really hard. Most of economics is highly politicized. But I do think it's possible. And I think it also—
Do you have an example of an external model?
Yeah, well, I mean, I gave you one a little bit earlier with like Warren Buffett is an external model to a lot of people because they're never going to meet Warren Buffett. They're never going to get into conflict with
Elon Musk.
Yeah, these guys are external models, and they allow people to feel like they're being very objective. And that may or may not be true, but it is an external model.
Okay. How does it allow people to feel like they're being objective?
I think because it's less, you're a little less emotionally tied up, maybe, than if—
That you think that they are more objective, or that your choices that you're making unconsciously imitating them appear to you to be more objective from your perspective? Which one?
Yeah, because they're sort of distant and very clearly successful. They have all the markers of success that this seems to be sort of objectively true. I was like, you can also, like, if you read these books where like multiple very successful investors are all saying the same thing, like, I do think there's a degree to which that is objectively true. It also definitely makes you feel like you're objectively true. but I also want to just contrast it with internal mediation, where for Warren Buffett himself, there are other people in his life who are also investors who are in competition with him, who he is in internal mediation with, that also influences his, decisions and his objectivity. It might be kind of a hard one.
And internal mediation is connected to envy.
Yeah, you're very close together. You're more likely to run in the same social circles. You're both pursuing the same goal, sort of like beside each other, like running after the same thing.
I see it as magnets a little bit, like, opposite charges attract and like charges repel. So when you feel like someone is too close to you, you're going to have friction. You're going to be repulsed, but when someone seems so far away, it's like it's the opposite of you. So you're attracted to it, like a magnet,
Yeah. Yeah. So that's also sort of, Mises. You feel something of lack, and you see an object with a person with metaphysical being that you lack, and you need that, and that's just mimetic.
And that's the same as the grass is greener on the other side, and good fences make good neighbors, and all these things are touching on that economic truth, right?
Yeah.
And that's not just monetary economics or whatever. That's also everything economics. That's human relationships, everything, right? I mean, we desire to be in company with people who we perceive to be desirable by others. Other people desire that, right?
Right.
Which is why so much of social media is all about status and who's the in crowd and who's the out crowd, and all of that is what's mediating, the choices that we make economically and socially.
Yeah, to bring up one more quick insight on finance that I think is interesting. Rivalries are very real, and you will see rivalries. A big one that I'm sure most Austrian listeners are going to sort of side with the fundamental analyst's point of view of an investor. But then there's these crazy guys that follow these charts, and they have their own systems, and they follow these advanced computer algorithms that are basically just charting systems that are very advanced, and those guys don't always agree with each other. They take completely different investments. They a lot of times sort of bash each other and talk shit about each other, but they both at the end of the day want the same thing. They want superior risk adjusted returns. And I think that there's a lot of people who are simply unwilling to hear the good parts from the other side's points of view. That, in my mind, the positive feedback's point of view and the negative feedback's point of view. So the people who are very interested in momentum and those types of trading strategies are very interested in more of the mimetic positive feedbacks. And people who are on the fundamental approach tend to view themselves as very scientific, very objective, focused on negative feedbacks, the impacts between the real economy and the stock market.
And how does envy play a role into the driving of markets here for a little bit? That's mimetic desire, right?
Yeah, I certainly think that most people get invested in the markets because they want money. They don't want useful goods and services so much as they want money. Money, for a lot of people, is more useful than anything you could do with it. We live in America, for example. Everything that we have is very excessive. Houses way bigger than we need, cars way bigger than we need, way more food in the refrigerator than we really need. But beyond that, we still want more money. And there's objects that we could get, but at the end of the day, just having a large number of money is in itself a sense of security and a sense of possibility, that a sense of freedom, of metaphysical being, like freedom of being, that we just don't have and we can never have, seemingly.
I think that's, go ahead.
No, just an infinite treadmill of hedonism.
I think that's why Donald Trump was such an easy scapegoat, because, I forget about the politics. It's just that he aesthetically embodied the excess aesthetic a little too much. And in our world, you're supposed to offset your big houses and your big bank account that you want everybody to know you have by constantly making language and gestures to be in solidarity with the poor, right? So it's like poor people in America are trying to dress like they're rich, and rich people in America are trying to dress like they're poor.
Yeah, that's certainly true.
And so that's, I remember going to a farmer's market, and it's like these wealthy people would put on overalls and act like, oh, look, we got a little folks. And it's like, no, man, you're rich. You're rich. You're putting on overalls and you're selling your wares and goods at the farmer's market. But this is a hobby you do. You're a very rich person. Okay. And then people who don't have much, they put on a suit and look at me, I'm ready to go. But we desire the opposite. So the rich feel guilty. And so they desire to be poor because they believe as if poverty is a sign of moral goodness in some sense.
Yeah.
And then the poor, they have more of a classic approach of, hey, if you've got money and you look wealthy, then that means you're a success. But Trump was too gaudy, with the golden toilet and everything. That's too gaudy. He wasn't showing enough language. If he had shown more rhetorical fealty to victim concern, he could have offset his target for mimetic envy, right?
Right. No. Yeah, the big power suits and the gold house didn't help that. I think that was it predicted. In a lot of ways. I think there were several articles that were like Trump's being set up basically as a scapegoat. He looks like one.
Right. I wrote that article in American Conservative back in 2016 or 2015 about Trump is the scapegoat supreme, and of course it ended in a virtual scapegoating where he was eliminated off of the virtual world. You know what I mean? He was banished.
Right. So, which is now he's never been more fascinating to me.
Right. But that's because that's the Girardian insight about the martyr's energy that happens when we are in a Christ haunted world where the stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone, meaning anything that is rejected is perceived to be a fascinating martyr's cornerstone, good or bad, right?
Right.
For ill or good. That's the phenomenon. So I keep telling people on radio, if they go through with convicting Trump, that will hasten the demise of the globalists faster than anything they could possibly do in terms of cultural, even if he's guilty of sin of whatever they convict him of, the aesthetic of now the one time a president who's not a general or a politician gets into office, that's the one time where you found a criminal problem with them. Come on. The visual of that, the mimetic aesthetic of that is so
sort of masked off. Yeah.
Not for the hardcore fans that are obsessed with worshiping Trump on the left or the right, but the people in the middle, which is where culture will shift in the long term. If the victim garbed globalists want to discredit themselves faster than anything in the world, put Trump in a conviction and you're done. It's faster than you could possibly imagine. You really will be. Not in the big picture of it. You're going to accelerate the globalist discrediting faster than anything. The best thing the globalists could do if they want to have prestige is to put him all on social media and bring him all back into the fold and just ignore him as much as they could. But they can't because they're locked in mimetic rivalry. And so to their own demise, he's the stumbling block that's going to end up destroying them even further.
And he's still writing these little letters from Donald J. Trump.
It's like letters from a golden jail, He
didn't just die. Like he's still out there, and something's going to happen. It's so loaded. Something has to happen. I don't see how it can't.
It's like Obi-Wan Kenobi said, if you strike me down off of social media, I will become more powerful than you could possibly imagine,
Right. And he is the most famous man in the world. And I don't think there's any dispute of that. So it's like sort of a problem when Joe Biden, nobody knows that guy.
It is a very funny thing when you really think about it from the big picture. It's like the most famous man in the world has been banished off of the face of television and the internet.
Right.
This can't go in a good direction for the people who've done this to them.
How is that going to turn out? I don't know.
But this is one of those things that mimetic theory just makes so super sharp and clear for people, right? When you understand it, because this idea that Jesus says, I am the stone that the builders rejected. and the stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. And this is like, maybe give me a better word than meme, but it's like a meme that is like infecting everything in our culture today. And so anything that is perceived by the culture as a stone rejected takes on a cornerstone like
Foundational quality. Yeah.
of mimetic interest, right? Now people say that, and they'll say, and I've had people object, and they've said, well, look at like Alex Jones. He was banished off of all social media. That kind of hurt his numbers in business, but I don't know if it did, because he's kind of been resurrected as this kind of like more edgy, interesting, cool.
Yeah, if you still
person
watch
by Generation Z, they love him now, even if it's ironic. They still love him. He's like a Chris Farley who also talks about conspiracy.
Oh yeah, right? Very popular. I mean, and I think that I don't know, wouldn't know the numbers, and he's not on YouTube, so it's like I can't look him up easy. But he's got his website. I'm pretty sure.
Who's this?
Alex Jones.
He's banished off of YouTube, but he's on all the other people's accounts.
Yeah, people upload. He's got content. I'm sure he's not doing poorly in any way. But again, like you said, like I don't know what's going to come of that. He's been executed. But today, when we get executed, we don't die, and so it's like there's this layer of reality that is social media that he's gone from. But he keeps poking up his little head, and same with Donald Trump. And I think that at some point there's got to be you can't have the most famous man in the world, bring him back to Trump. I don't see how you can just cut him off the internet and that doesn't someday come back. And that head doesn't come popping back up sometime. I mean, he's an old man, so.
But there's an economics to this. There's something about this idea of prohibiting an object. Like,
yeah, it's prohibited. So it's like, now we want it. It's desirable to us now to have Trump back, to have Alex Jones back.
So there's like a black market for Trump now.
Yeah.
So like there was weed, and then they decided to prohibit it with the war on drugs. And then the weed became more desirable because people were like, hey, this is what you do when you want to numb out from the mainstream loser society. So you became a pothead. And now there's a war on Trump. It prohibited Trump from decent society, which is going to make him an underground black market object of desire more than ever. That's not good, because banishing weed gave us meth. So banishing Trump is going to produce, if that's weed, it's going to produce something called meth. And that's scary in some ways. Jeez.
Yeah.
What is the meth Trump?
That's a great question.
From an economic standpoint, it's going to be something that's easier in terms of portability, with a bigger high per purchase, right? And I'm saying this socially too, that whatever the new thing is, whether it's a movement or a figure or multiple figures, is going to have a more bang for the buck in terms of rhetorical and cultural power.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I see what you mean.
You see what I'm saying here?
Because we want it now, and we don't have to care
about Trump. The more they banish him, I'm telling you, if the globalist, liberal, neoliberals want to listen to me, the worst thing you could do for your movement is to put that man in handcuffs. If you show a photo of that man in perp walk, it's not about like, oh, the right's going to be more powerful. You're just going to discredit the whole project of the Mickey Mouse world of globalism, because it's just viscerally so against the concept of the stone the builders rejected. We perceive scapegoats and misfits and outcasts as the place of where all cultural energy is, because we're haunted by the cross. Right?
Yeah. And there's got, yeah. They're added to this, like Joe Biden's just total lack of presence just creates this mass, like even bigger void than if Joe Biden would have been a true rival and literally just tried to be more Trump than Trump.
Yeah, that's so true. That's such a good point.
Solve the problem, I think, more than just creating a void. Because now it's like it feels like we don't have a president. Because I mean, there's a few things he does. He commented on that. But he's nowhere near in the public eye as Trump was. And so it more feels like a void than anything.
Right. But isn't it a good tactic that they didn't engage in mimetic rivalry and put up a Trumpian left-wing guy, because then that would have escalated even worse? You know what I mean?
Yeah, probably. This is why I don't vote. So
Right. Yeah. I'm just thinking out loud strategically how this might play out, though. So you're right. They put up an empty suit, if there ever was one,
just create this massive void. So I
with
don't
no
know.
charisma and no energy and no gravitas, nothing. It's just total scripted.
Yeah,
In terms of market differentiation, there's a big differentiation there.
He's an algorithm.
Right.
If we've ever been ran by an algorithm, Joe Biden is a hologram. Prove me wrong.
Right.
I think is what someone said on Twitter. But
Yeah.
he hasn't been, during the whole election and everything. It was just like he wasn't really doing big campaigns. He wasn't there. I don't know anybody who's ever seen Joe Biden. I know a lot of people have seen Donald Trump. Maybe that's where I live, but in Ohio, we voted for Trump. So,
wow,
I do think that maybe my environment is a little bit different in some, but
so interesting. Yeah. So the void in it's definitely a market differentiation, though, in terms of your product. If these political parties are products, they've offered a differentiated product, which is, you've had your uppers, now you need a down, you need something to just like numb you out and relax, because, and that's work. The hardcore followers of television and newspapers, like the Democrats, have dropped off dramatically watching the news. They're out. They're like, okay, we're safe.
we're done.
Please arrest Trump and I'll be able to sleep completely safe at night. And that's all. They're good to go, right? Their boogeyman is still lurking in the shadows, which they're terrified of. But generally speaking, they've kind of turned off paying attention, except for like the vaccine thing or whatever. But other than that,
I don't know if you've seen some of Joe Biden's like photo shoots that he's done, where he's in like these old classic 60s cars and he's wearing like blue jeans. Those started like the day that he won the presidency, or like the day after, and they haven't stopped. And they're all very like poppy colors, unreal, like sort of a magazine Coca-Cola ad style feel. And it's just, to me, seems like the whole presidency of the Coca-Cola ad. You're just sort of, you got this guy who's supposed to say these lines, and otherwise he sort of looks good and he looks presidential. But there's the other people are making decisions. He kind of just comes in and signs the dotted line.
And that's where I see that, some people are terrified of the critical theory and the McWokeism, what I call McWokeism. But I see that as a sign of late stage neoliberalism is on its way out, right? Because it's like, it's kind of like how in the Cold War era, fundamentalism Christianity, the moral majority, Jerry Falwell, Dr. Dobson thing, that became really powerful. And everybody was like, oh my gosh, our whole country's ruled by these iron grip fundamentalists. But it was like they were really loud on their way out of power, right? And it feels like the same thing's happening with what's like McWokeism to me is like fundamentalist political correctness.
Yeah.
Political correctness was like mainline denominational Christianity, and then and then they become like it's not strong enough. It's got enough. It doesn't have enough caffeine, so people then go to the fundamentalist versions as those mainline churches become irrelevant. And that's where I see this leftist kind of liberal whatever project is that it's like they had their mainline political correct institutions, and they didn't have to preach so much. Their values were imbued into everything, very clean and pristine. That's why films in the 80s and 90s didn't feel so preachy, but compared to movies now, the fact that they have to preach so much overtly and it feels so.
Yeah. No, I didn't thought about that, but that makes total sense, because I watch a lot of 80s movies, action movies, different things like that. And I was thinking about the movie Red Dawn. They made the movie Red Dawn back in the 80s, and they made a remake. And I thought it was interesting. The reason they made it the first time was probably largely related to the Cold War and some sort of propaganda about the Cold War, but just to notice the massive change in tone, and also kind of ask the question of why did we need a remake of Red Dawn? And I'm not sure when it was, 2011, 2012. And it was a very different tone. And like you said, there's just the preachiness, especially in the last 2 or 3 years, it's really accelerated. And I think it's accelerating, certainly, and that they feel like they have license now to sort of get revenge on sort of the Trumpian era of anti-political correctness. and Trump hats, and so they're going to sort of shove it down our throats on Amazon Prime and Netflix.
But I liken it to, kids who grew up in evangelical fundamentalism. They watch shows like Bible Man and VeggieTales.
Oh yeah, VeggieTales.
And so when you like the modern woke Star Wars is as preachy about that religion as VeggieTales is about the biblical religion. And what I'm trying to, what I think this is a good sign that the wokeism is like late stage dying liberalism.
Trying to inject a little bit more propaganda because it's not working.
Right. And that's a good sign. See what conservatives do, since they're so reactionary, is they always like, oh, look, they're getting more preachy. Let's get more No. You don't imitate a dying opponent. Okay.
Yeah.
You don't imitate. If he's going, you don't go, oh, okay, let's do that too. That's how we'll win the fight. It's like, no, stop, please. Get out of his way and allow your opponent to just go ahead and fade on out to pasture. Because see, this neoliberal project needs the conservative boogeyman to like stay alive mimetically. It needs the boogeyman to keep fighting it. And that's why this new right that keeps wanting to say, oh my goodness, we don't have time for people like what you're saying, Burke, about, hey, just, start business. We have to do macro scale fighting. We have to ban critical theory and all this stuff. And, like all this stuff, it sounds nice, but at the end of the day, you're just imitating a dying opponent who's had a full monopoly. And now you realize how much they control, but they're already dying. So just let them die. The moment you keep fighting for the object of power, the more you keep that zombie going. You see what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. We should be building things, new things. It's not easy. But trying to, like you said, fight critical race theory in school is a very large problem when you could just homeschool your kids, which maybe will be illegal sometime. But there are alternatives usually in our society, hopefully. There are times to fight larger scale problems, I'm sure. I think it's hard to say when.
Right. But you can fight a large scale battle without a large scale problem without getting into politics as a new legislative solution. You know what I mean?
Or yeah.
I mean, when Nikola Tesla created alternating current, that was solving a large scale problem of energy, but he didn't go to Congress to get a legislative bill passed to get him the permission to do it. He just did it. Right?
He did it. Yeah, absolutely.
That's the mindset I think we need to have. We need to have mimetic role models like Nikola Tesla. I think he is a Christian role model we should emulate.
Yes.
Well, hey, it's been a real pleasure speaking with you. We've covered a lot of ground economically and given some sketch. I found foundational thoughts for people to think about how mimetic theory applies with, Austrian school and some other economic insights for investment, for I know we've only just started a foundation here, so maybe we'll do it again sometime. Yeah,
it was really good talking to you, David.
Yeah. Any final thoughts before we part for our audience, for anything they can do to, homework to investigate these topics more for folks who are new to, like, beginner in mimetic theory in Austrian school, or want to get into the mimetic theory more?
For today's sort of science obsessed society, I think O'Garlian's mimetic brain is an excellent entryway for a lot of people, and it's not recommended enough. All of Girard's books are obviously excellent. They're a certain style that maybe isn't for every American reader, and someone who's maybe used to reading scientific materials could get into, or psychological materials could at least get into O'Garlian's thought as an entryway more than anything else. But hey, I just had a great time talking to you. I love talking about these topics to people. And
one last bonus question: what is the economics of hypnotherapy? Since O'Garlian talks about hypnotherapy, what's that all about? Hypnotism. Let's just say hypnotism in general.
There's hypnotism is a big one. O'Garlian talks about it. They talk about it in Things Hidden Since the Foundation of the World as well. And I've tried it on people. It hasn't really worked, mostly because I think I did it wrong. I think there's like all these different methods, but there is something about it that is mimetic, and like the person needs to trust you. So they already need to sort of view you as a mimetic model. They need to feel like they can imitate you safely so that violence won't erupt. If they have any, I think people sort of subconsciously have a fear that violence is going to erupt. And so they're really unwilling to be like, yes, you can perform hypnosis on me. But if you can get them to trust you enough, like, no, this isn't going to happen. I do think it's possible to get people in hypnotic states. I wouldn't, there's a lot that is there.
It sounds like the nightly news.
I think it happens on news and on things like that there's visual and audio stimuli, you know what I'm saying? Stimulus that aid, as well as words.
Every time you do hard news, they talk in a different way. Like if you watch, political pundits like Maddow and Hannity, they talk in a different tone from the hard news anchors. But the hard news anchors are really where you get a lot of persuasion deeply into you, because they do the whole, in other news,
absolutely. But also,
Maddow and Hannity don't talk like that. You know what I mean?
The breaking news segment where this like big visual kind of comes in, and pulls it back and then spins and kind of like, you know what I'm saying? Like there's this big visual, like ESPN, dun, 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 and then it like pulls into these very authoritative people sitting high up.
Fox News alert, that thing.
There's a lot. Yeah, absolutely. So then that could lead into financial media, news media, and all these
because
things.
It's like it conditions you ritualistically, like, something important's happening. And then they're like, in other news today, Joe Biden says the economy is getting back better. And you're like, oh yes, authority figure, audio telling me everything okay. And it's the same. And they do that same style of speaking that, again, the pundits don't do. Maddow doesn't say that. She talks like an argumentative, and did you see what President Trump did? It's like, okay, we know your opinion, but the hard news stuff is where real persuasion's happening, I think.
Yeah. And it's very mechanical compared to the very emotive, opinionated Sean Hannity type stuff.
And the dispassionate style of hard news is way more persuasive than the emotive.
In a way, it creates more of a consensus probably than the argument that create a division and a distraction and an object of look here, pay attention. I mean, it does create a lot of attention. But if you don't want something, you want something to be heard, understood, and complied with, but not necessarily paid attention to. Sort of like a stop sign, something that's just sort of there.
So all the persuasion action is happening on the hard news, audio, like radio and TV, because the opinion pundit shows are more about preaching to the choir and catechizing and reinforcing the values to the choir, to those who go to church every week, who are really sold out believers. But for the moderate middle, where all the cultural things are, because they're the ones that are kind of going to whichever tribe. They're running as a herd to the tribe that it's in fashion, right? And that's going to be set by the persuasion of hard news.
Absolutely, yeah. At the end of the day, it's sort of that even keeled center line they're trying to portray.
Wow, so interesting, man. Really great stuff. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, no problem. Anytime. Love to